Okay, so today we're going to be talking about conversions. So most conversions require some memorization. To convert, you need to understand how much of a single unit there is before you can calculate several or parts of a measurement. So for example, if you know that 1 foot is 12 inches, that helps you understand how many inches would be in 3 feet. But if you didn't know how many inches were in a foot at all, you'd have a pretty difficult time solving that problem. So here's some more examples that we might see used, especially in the United States. The 1 foot is 12 inches, 1 yard is 3 feet, 1 hour is 60 minutes. And there's some basics that we should know about time, length, and capacity, like cups to pints and those sorts of things. Remember also, this is the thing that really stumps kiddos, is that it takes more of a small unit to make a larger unit. So for example, it takes 100 pennies to make this dollar, 20 nickels because they're 5 cents, 10 dimes because they're a little bit larger again, so I need less of them to make this dollar, and quarters being the largest denomination, only need 4 to make a dollar. So the smaller the unit it is, the more of them I need to cut to a larger unit. And so you're going to see that reflected as you do conversions, that the numbers are going to get quite a bit bigger or quite a bit smaller. So let's go ahead and try one. If I know my conversion factor, which means the equivalent units, like 12 inches is 1 foot, then I can multiply to solve. You can always solve with multiplication, but sometimes you'll be multiplying a fraction, which is the same as dividing. So let's go ahead and look at this example. If I have 100 pennies and I know that 100 pennies is $1, how could I figure out how many pennies are in $8? Well, if there's 101, then I would take that 100 and multiply it by 8. And I could find out that there are 800 pennies in $1. Same thing with nickels. If there are 20 nickels in $1, and I want to know how many nickels are in $8, I would multiply that. 20 times 8 would be 160. Now I want to give you a short example of what it might look like if I was going to actually have maybe a fraction to multiply with. So for example, if we're going to do something in the metric system. If I had 100 meters and I want to know how many decimeters that is, well, I would first need to know how much of a meter a decimeter is. A decimeter is 1/10 of a meter. Okay, so if it's 1/10 of a meter, 1/10 of a meter is a decimeter. So if I want to know how many decimeters are in a meter, I could say, or in 100 meters, I could say 1/10 times 100. Now, if we're speaking with fractions, since this number over here does not have a bottom number, I'm going to put 1 on there. It's always there, but we don't write it unless we need it. So I can put that 1 on, and I'm going to go ahead and multiply this, and I get 100 over 10. 100 tenths. Well, this fraction bar means divide. It means the same as divide. So 100 divided by 10 is 10. And so here is an example of how I might multiply a fraction, which is still technically the same as dividing, to solve for the question. Metric conversions work the same as standard units. So if you know the basic information, like we were talking about, if I know 12 inches makes 1 foot, it makes it pretty simple to figure out a problem. However, since we don't use that in the United States, it's not typically as easy. But here's just some of that basic information. So, 1 meter is 10 decimeters, 1 meter is 100 centimeters, 1 meter is 1,000 millimeters, 1 meter is 1/10 of a decameter, 100th of a hectometer, and 1,000th of a kilometer. So let's go ahead and try one. So if I know there's 100 centimeters and 1 meter, then how many centimeters would there be in 3 meters? There'd be 300. If I have 5 meters, how many millimeters do I have? Well, if I know that there's 1,000 millimeters in 1 meter, and I have 5 meters, then I would just multiply by 5 and find out there's 5 millimeters. It's pretty simple, kind of like our feet to inches conversions, which are simple for many Americans to do. But since we're not quite as familiar with these units, sometimes we get a little confused. I see a lot of us look at the problem and shut down. We don't even want to try it because then it's a unit that we don't feel as comfortable with. So we learned a trick in class to help us with this. We learned a mnemonic, and if you remember, mnemonic's a silly phrase that helps me remember what to do. So we learned that kids hate decimals unless decimals create money. And the U there stands for units, meters, liters, and grams. So all meters, liters, and grams, depending on the amounts you have, you just add these prefixes into it. So centiliters, centigrams, centimeters would all be appropriate. So let's go ahead and try it out with the trick that we learned in class. So first thing you do is you find your start place on the chart. So let's start with this problem here. I have 1.53 meters, and I want to know how many centimeters that is. So I find where I'm starting. At first I'm starting in meters, which is right here. And I'm going to start from the decimal point on my number. So I'm going to grab my number here, 1.53, and I'm going to start right here on the decimal. So here's where meters are. So I'm going to count how many places you need to move on the chart and which direction. So if I'm in meters and I want to go to centimeters, so I'm in meters, I'm going to go to centimeters. So I'm going to count that. I have to move over 2 places, and I moved 2 places to the right. So that's what I'm going to do up here. I'm going to start from my decimal, and I'm going to move that decimal 2 places to the right. Now remember, mathematically speaking, decimals don't really move, but this is just a trick to make it easier for us. So the decimal now lands right behind the 3, and now I have 153. So I can say that 1.53 meters is the same as 153 centimeters. Now, let me just throw in a quick example because I don't think I added this with the next example. But what if instead of moving to centimeters, I had moved to millimeters? Well, I would have done the same thing. I would have started at meters and I would have counted 1, 2, 3, 3 to the right. And here I'd be at my decimal and I'd want to move 3 to the right. So I would try that out. 1, 2, 3. And you can see that I don't have another number. So if that ever happens, what I do is I just put a 0 in there. And so I would have ended up with 1,530 millimeters. All right. Go ahead and erase that, and then we're going to talk about our second example there. And for some reason, our 1.53 does not want to erase. Let's go ahead then and get into our next one. So into our next problem then, we have 235.6 millimeters, and we want to know how many liters that is. So let's write that down here, 235.6 milliliters, and we're moving to liters. And we are going to do the same thing. So first we're going to find our starting point on the chart. So we're in milliliters, which is down here, and we're moving to liters, which is up here. So I'm going to count how many that is. That's 1, 2, 3 places to the left. And so I'm going to start with my decimal down here and also move 3 places to the left like I did on my chart. So 1, 2, 3. I end up with 0.2356 liters. So the trick tends to be the easiest thing to do, as we've said before. Remember, decimals don't really move. This is just a trick to make metric conversions a little bit easier for us since they're not in units that we're comfortable with.